The blood-red sun slipped below the horizon as Beckett Ryder urged his exhausted horse forward through the fading light, the distant sounds of paradise, Wyoming growing fainter behind him. It was 1879, and after 3 days of hard riding to deliver supplies to the neighboring town of Larkspur, all he wanted was to return to his small ranch and fall into his bunk. The summer heat lingered despite the setting sun, and Beckett decided to take a shortcut along Eagle Creek, hoping its cool waters would offer relief before the final stretch home. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Samson, picked its way carefully down the embankment toward the babbling water. That's when Beckett heard a weak sound that might have been mistaken for the wind if not for the unmistakable human quality it carried. "Whoa," he murmured, pulling Samson to a halt. The sound came again, faint but distinct, a moan of pain or despair. Beckett dismounted, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth near the creek's edge. His hand moved instinctively to the revolver on his hip as he peered through the gathering dusk. "Hello," he called, his voice steady despite the tension gathering in his shoulders. "Someone there?" No response came, but as he moved cautiously along the bank, the last rays of sunlight illuminated a crumpled form half hidden among the tall reeds. Beckett approached carefully, still wary of an ambush. The Wyoming territory had grown safer in recent years. But a man didn't survive the frontier by being careless. What he found, however, was no threat. A young woman lay unconscious, her dress torn and mudded, her face pale beneath streaks of dirt. A nasty gash on her forehead had crusted with blood, and her breathing came shallow and irregular. Beside her lay a small leather satchel, its contents scattered: a few garments, a hairbrush, a worn Bible. "Madam," Beckett knelt beside her, checking for other injuries. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. She couldn't have been there long, perhaps since earlier that day, but night was falling fast, and temperatures would drop quickly. The nearest doctor was back in paradise, a good hour's ride, and leaving her alone while he sought help was unthinkable. With gentle movements, Beckett gathered her limp form into his arms. She weighed hardly anything, and he cradled her against his chest as he would a child. "You're safe now, precious," he murmured, the endearment slipping out unbidden as he looked at her vulnerable face. "I've got you." He quickly collected her scattered belongings into the satchel, slung it over his shoulder, and carried her to where Samson waited patiently. With careful maneuvering, he mounted his horse while holding her securely against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Home, Samson," he urged. "Steady now." The horse seemed to sense the gravity of their burden and picked its way back toward Beckett's ranch with careful steps. As they rode, Beckett felt the woman stir slightly, a soft moan escaping her lips. "Rest easy," he said softly. "You're safe. I'm taking you somewhere you can heal." He didn't know who she was or what had happened to her, but as Paradise's buildings faded completely into the distance behind them and the vast Wyoming sky filled with stars, Beckett knew his quiet life had just changed irrevocably. The small ranch house came into view after 40 minutes of careful riding. It wasn't much, a sturdy 2-room cabin with a lean-to stable attached, but it was Beckett's, built with his own hands after years of saving while working other men's land. A thin wisp of smoke still rose from the chimney where he'd banked the fire before leaving 3 days ago. Samson nickered softly as they approached, recognizing home. Beckett dismounted carefully, still cradling the unconscious woman, and carried her inside. He laid her gently on his bed, then hurried to light the lamp and stoke the fire back to life. The woman's skin felt cool to the touch, and he quickly covered her with his warmest quilt. In the lamplight, he could see her more clearly. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with chestnut hair that would likely be lustrous when clean. Her features were delicate, with high cheekbones and a small, straight nose. The gash on her forehead looked painful but not dangerously deep. Beckett filled a basin with water from the bucket by the hearth and found a clean cloth. With careful movements, he began to clean the wound, his weathered hands moving with surprising gentleness. As the cool cloth touched her skin, the woman's eyes suddenly fluttered open, revealing irises the color of summer violets. For a moment, she stared at him uncomprehendingly. Then terror filled her eyes, and she tried to scramble away, a hoarse cry escaping her lips. "Easy now," Beckett said, raising his hands and moving back to give her space. "I'm not going to hurt you. Found you passed out by Eagle Creek. You're safe here." The woman pressed herself against the wall, her gaze darting frantically around the unfamiliar cabin. Who are you?" Her voice was raspy, as though her throat was parched. "Beckett Ryder. This is my ranch about an hour outside of Paradise. I was returning from a supply run when I found you." He moved slowly to pour water from the pitcher into a cup. "You need to drink." "Then you can tell me who I should fetch to help you." She hesitated, then reached for the cup with trembling hands. After taking several grateful sips, she lowered it to her lap. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Josephine Mills." "Miss Mills," Beckett acknowledged with a slight nod. "That cut needs tending." "May I?" He gestured toward the cloth and basin. Josephine raised a hand to her forehead, wincing when her fingers found the gash. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. As Beckett carefully cleaned the wound, he asked, "What happened to you? Were you attacked?" A shadow crossed her face. "Not exactly." She looked away, staring into the flickering fire. "I was traveling by stagecoach to Cheyenne. There was a family on board. They were kind to me, but there was an accident. The horses spooked at something on the road, and the coach overturned." She paused, her hands clutching the quilt. "The others, I don't know what happened to them. I was thrown clear, but I hit my head. When I came to, the coach was gone. I tried to follow the road, but I must have become disoriented. I remember reaching the creek, thinking I needed water, and then—" She shook her head slightly. "Nothing else until now." Beckett frowned. "The Larkspur stage, that runs south of here. You must have wandered quite a ways." He finished cleaning the wound and reached for a small jar on a nearby shelf. "This is salve plantain and yarrow. It'll help with the healing." As he applied the salve, he continued, "First light, I'll ride to Paradise and fetch Doc Wilson. And I can send word about the accident. There's a telegraph office there." Josephine nodded slightly, then winced at the movement. "Thank you, Mr. Ryder." "I have no way to repay your kindness right now, but no need," he interrupted. "Anyone would do the same." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I'm not sure that's true, but I'm grateful all the same." Once her wound was dressed, Beckett insisted she take some broth he warmed over the fire, along with a chunk of bread that had survived his absence. She ate slowly, as though each bite required tremendous effort. When she'd finished, exhaustion was evident in every line of her body. "You take the bed," Beckett said. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly. You can and will," he said firmly. "You need proper rest to heal." Too weak to argue further, Josephine nodded. "Thank you," she murmured as she settled back against the pillow, "for finding me, for calling me." A slight blush colored her pale cheeks. "Precious," he supplied, a bit embarrassed himself. "Didn't realize I'd said that aloud, just meant you're valuable, a life worth saving." Her eyes were already closing. "Still nice," she whispered, "to be valuable to someone, even a stranger." Beckett watched as she drifted into sleep, wondering what story lay behind those words. He moved quietly about the cabin, settling Samson in the lean-to for the night and preparing his own makeshift bed near the hearth. As he stretched out on the floor, he found himself listening to Josephine's soft, steady breathing, reassuring himself that she would make it through the night. Just before dawn, he woke to the sound of distress. Josephine was thrashing in the bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare. "No, please," she whimpered. "I can't go back, please." Beckett moved quickly to her side. "Miss Mills," he called softly. "Josephine, you're dreaming." Her eyes snapped open, wild with fear until recognition slowly dawned. "Mr. Ryder," she breathed. "Just a nightmare," he said gently. "You're safe here." She sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I'm sorry to disturb your rest." "Don't apologize. Been known to have a few nightmares myself." He poured her another cup of water. "Sun will be up soon. I'll head to town for the doctor once it's light." Josephine took a sip of water. "Mr. Ryder, before you go," she hesitated. "There's something I should tell you. The stage accident had happened, just as I said, but I wasn't supposed to be on that stage at all." Beckett sat down on the edge of the bed, giving her his full attention. I ran away, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. From a situation in Denver. A powerful man, was going to force me to marry his son. I had no choice but to flee. Force you? Beckett's brow furrowed. That's not right. He owned the boarding house where I lived and worked after my parents died. Said I owed him for my keep, and the only way to repay was to marry Thomas. She shuddered. Thomas was cruel. I'd seen how he treated others. I couldn't bear the thought of being his wife. So you ran, she nodded. With little more than what you found in my satchel. I bought passage on the stage using my mother's brooch, the only valuable thing I owned. I was heading to Cheyenne, where I have a distant cousin. She looked up at him, fear evident in her eyes. If word gets back to Denver about where I am, they might come looking. Beckett considered this. Paradise is small. Word doesn't travel much beyond our boundaries unless we want it to. He stood, his decision made. I'll fetch the doctor, but I won't mention your full name or circumstances. Just that I found an injured traveler. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. I know I'm imposing. You're not, he said firmly. Rest now. I'll be back before midday. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, Beckett saddled Samson and set out for Paradise. The town was small but growing, situated at a crossroads of cattle trails and the newer railway line. As he rode down the main street, several people called greetings, which he returned with brief nods. Beckett wasn't unfriendly, but he kept to himself, a habit formed during years spent moving from ranch to ranch as a hired hand. The doctor's house stood at the far end of town, a neat white building with green shutters. Doc Wilson was sweeping his porch when Beckett approached. Beckett Ryder, the doctor said with surprise. Don't often see you in town twice in 1 week. Everything all right? Beckett dismounted. Need your help, Doc. Found a young woman unconscious by Eagle Creek yesterday evening. She's at my place now, has a nasty cut on her head, might be concussed. Doc Wilson's bushy eyebrows shot up. A woman at your place? Town'll be talking for weeks. Let them talk, Beckett said curtly. She needs medical attention. Stage accident south of here, apparently. The Larkspur Run. Haven't heard anything about that. The doctor set aside his broom and turned toward the door. Let me get my bag. While the doctor gathered his supplies, Beckett crossed to the telegraph office. The operator, a thin man named Harris, looked up from his newspaper. Beckett, what can I do for you? Need to inquire about a stage accident. Larkspur line yesterday or the day before, heading toward Cheyenne. Harris frowned. Haven't heard anything, but I can send a wire to Larkspur and Cheyenne, see if there's news. Appreciate it, Beckett said, dropping coins on the counter. And Harris. Keep it quiet for now, just making inquiries for a friend. The telegraph operator gave him a curious look but nodded. I'll let you know what I hear. With that settled, Beckett returned to where Doc Wilson waited with his medical bag and a small valise. Thought I might need to stay overnight, the doctor explained. Don't want to risk riding back if your patient needs watching. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence. Beckett had known Doc Wilson since arriving in Paradise 5 years earlier. The doctor had treated a nasty cut on Beckett's arm after a run-in with a barbed wire fence, and they'd developed a mutual respect. As they approached the cabin, Beckett was surprised to see smoke rising steadily from the chimney. Inside, they found Josephine up and moving slowly about the small kitchen area. She had tied back her hair with a ribbon and washed her face, though her dress remained torn and stained. You shouldn't be up, Beckett said, frowning. She turned, offering a small smile that transformed her face despite the bandage on her forehead. I felt stronger after resting. I hope you don't mind I found some coffee and started breakfast. It was the least I could do. Doc Wilson stepped forward, setting down his bags. I'm Dr. Wilson, miss. Beckett here says you had quite an accident. Josephine, she replied, extending her hand. And yes, though I was fortunate Mr. Ryder found me. The doctor performed a thorough examination, checking her pupils, reflexes, and the wound itself. You're lucky, he pronounced finally. The cut isn't deep enough for stitches, and there's no sign of serious concussion. Still, you need rest for at least a few days, no exertion. I'm afraid I can't impose on Mr. Ryder for days, Josephine said, glancing at Beckett. Before he could respond, Doc Wilson continued, "Well, you certainly can't travel yet, and the Paradise Hotel isn't fit for a lady recovering from injury." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Ordinarily, I'd suggest Mrs. Baker's boarding house, but she's full up with the railway surveyors." "She can stay here," Beckett said, surprising himself with the offer. "I have the space and it's quiet, good for healing." The doctor raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Medically speaking, that would be best, though perhaps we should send for a female companion, propriety and all that." Josephine's face fell. "I don't know anyone here, and if word spreads that I'm in Paradise." Understanding dawned in the doctor's eyes. "Running from something, are you, or someone?" When she didn't answer, he patted her hand gently. "Don't worry, my dear, doctor-patient confidentiality. I won't pry further and I won't spread tales." "Thank you," she whispered. "As for staying here," Doc Wilson continued, "Beckett's reputation is beyond reproach. Anyone in town would vouch for his character, and given the circumstances, I think we can set aside the usual social niceties." Relief washed over Josephine's face. "You're both very kind." After leaving instructions for care and promising to return in 3 days, the doctor departed. Beckett watched him go, then turned to find Josephine swaying slightly on her feet. "Back to bed," he said, taking her elbow to steady her. "Doctor's orders. But the breakfast, I'll see to it. Been cooking for myself for years." He helped her back to the bed, where she sank down gratefully. "Mr. Ryder," she said hesitantly, "I truly appreciate your kindness, but I can't stay here indefinitely. Once I'm recovered, I'll need to find work. I have very little money, and I still hope to reach my cousin in Cheyenne eventually." Beckett considered this as he moved to the stove to finish the breakfast she'd started. Paradise is growing, might be opportunities here. "The general store was looking for help last I heard." Hope flickered in her eyes. "Do you think they'd hire a stranger?" Mrs. Hollister, she owns the store with her husband, is always complaining about needing an educated woman to help with the books. Says her husband's arithmetic is worse than a schoolboy's. He cracked eggs into a pan. "You educated?" "Yes, my father was a teacher before he died. I can read, write, and do sums well enough." "There you go, then." He flipped the eggs with practiced ease. "Once you're healed up, we'll see about getting you properly situated. For now, your job is to rest." The next few days fell into a surprising rhythm. Beckett had lived alone for so long that he'd expected another person in his space to feel intrusive. Instead, Josephine's presence brought an unexpected warmth to the cabin. She respected his quiet nature, never filling the silence with needless chatter, yet their conversations flowed naturally when they did speak. By the 3rd day, she was strong enough to sit on the porch in the afternoons, watching as Beckett tended to the small herd of cattle he kept on his land. He found himself glancing toward the cabin more often than necessary, taking comfort in the sight of her slight figure in the rocking chair. When Doc Wilson returned for his follow-up visit, he pronounced Josephine well on the road to recovery. "The wound is healing nicely," he said, replacing her bandage with a smaller one. "Another week and you should be able to resume normal activities, though I'd still advise against travel for at least 2 weeks." After the doctor left, Beckett found Josephine looking thoughtfully at her hands. "Something troubling you?" he asked. She looked up, a small furrow between her brows. "I was just thinking about what comes next. The doctor says I shouldn't travel yet, but I can't continue to impose on you. Perhaps there's somewhere in town I could stay while looking for work." Beckett leaned against the doorframe, choosing his words carefully. "You're welcome here until you're fully recovered, no imposition." He paused. "But I understand wanting your independence. I could ask around town about lodgings if you'd like." Relief and gratitude flickered across her face. "Yes, please, and about that work at the general store." "I'm heading into town tomorrow for supplies. I'll speak with Mrs. Hollister then." The next morning, Beckett rode into Paradise with a list of items needed at the ranch and a newfound purpose in his step. The general store was his first stop, where he found Alina Hollister arranging a display of canned goods. "Beckett Ryder," she said warmly. "Twice in 2 weeks must be a record. What can I do for you today?" He handed her his list, then cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Hollister, I came to ask about that help you've been wanting to hire. For the books and such. Her eyebrows rose. You offering? Didn't think figures were your strong suit. Not me, he said quickly. There's a young lady, educated, good with numbers, looking for work. A young lady, is it? Mrs. Hollister's eyes twinkled with interest. And where might I find this paragon? Beckett shifted uncomfortably. She's staying at my place for now. Had an accident stage overturned and I found her by the creek. Doc Wilson's been seeing to her, says she'll be fully recovered soon. At your place? Mrs. Hollister's expression was more curious than scandalized. That explains the rumors. Half the town's wondering who your mysterious visitor might be. Her name's Josephine Mills. She's respectable, just down on her luck. Mrs. Hollister studied him for a moment. Well, I do need the help. Tell Miss Mills she can come see me when she's well enough. I'll want to test her skills, of course, but if she's as capable as you suggest, the position is hers. Relief washed over him. Thank you, I'll tell her. As he turned to leave, Mrs. Hollister called after him. Beckett, it's good to see you taking an interest in someone else's welfare, I mean. He nodded awkwardly and continued gathering his supplies. His next stop was the small dress shop run by the widow Simmons. Mr. Ryder, she greeted him with surprise. Can't say I've ever had you in my shop before, Mrs. Simmons, he acknowledged with a tip of his hat. I'm here on behalf of a lady. She needs a few dresses, practical ones for work. Had to leave her things behind in a hurry. The widow's eyes lit with interest. This would be the young woman staying at your ranch, the one Doc Wilson's been treating. News traveled fast in Paradise. Yes, madam, Josephine Mills. She's about this tall. He held his hand to his shoulder, slender build. I don't know ladies' sizes, but I think I can help, Mrs. Simmons said, moving toward a rack of ready-made dresses. Does she favor any particular colors? Beckett thought of Josephine's violet eyes. Blue, maybe, or purple. Mrs. Simmons selected 2 work dresses, a shirtwaist, and a skirt. These should do for a start. She can come in for proper measurements once she's feeling better. After paying for the clothes, Beckett made one final stop at the telegraph office. Harris waved him over as soon as he entered. Got a response about that stage accident, he said, handing over a slip of paper. Overturned about 15 miles south of Larkspur, driver and 2 passengers with minor injuries. They reported a young woman was thrown clear but wandered off before they could find her. They've been searching. Beckett read the message, relief washing over him. Send a wire back. Let them know she's safe in Paradise, recovering from a head injury. No need to send anyone for her. She'll be staying here for now. Harris nodded and began to compose the message. Anything else they should know? Beckett thought of what Josephine had told him about her situation in Denver. No. Just that she's safe. When he returned to the ranch, he found Josephine sitting on the porch, a book in her lap. She looked up as he approached, a smile spreading across her face that made something twist pleasantly in his chest. Good news, he said, dismounting. Mrs. Hollister's interested in hiring you, says to come see her when you're well enough. Joy lit her features. Truly, oh, that's wonderful. She set aside her book and stood carefully. And did you learn anything about the stage accident? He nodded, unloading the packages from his saddlebags. Wire came back. Everyone survived with minor injuries. They've been looking for you. Relief washed over her face. I'm glad no one was seriously hurt. That poor family was so kind to me. I sent word that you're safe here. He handed her the package from the dress shop. Got you these. Nothing fancy, but Mrs. Simmons said they should fit well enough until you can visit her shop yourself. Josephine took the package with wide eyes, peering inside. Mr. Ryder, this is too generous. I can't possibly accept. Consider it an advance on your wages from Mrs. Hollister, he said gruffly. You can repay me when you're settled. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Thank you, not just for the clothes, but for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me. No need to think on that, he said, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said softly. Not anyone. Over the next week, Josephine grew stronger. She insisted on helping around the cabin, cooking meals and tidying up despite Beckett's protests. They developed a comfortable routine, sharing quiet evenings by the fire where she would read aloud from one of the few books he owned or simply talk about their days. Beckett found himself looking forward to these evenings more than he cared to admit. There was something about Josephine's presence that eased a loneliness he hadn't fully acknowledged until it began to lift. 10 days after he'd found her by the creek, Doc Wilson declared her well enough to begin work if she felt up to it. Mrs. Hollister had been by to visit twice, ostensibly to check on Josephine's recovery, but really to assess her suitability for the position. The older woman had been impressed with Josephine's quick mind and proper manners, offering her the job on the spot. "You start Monday," she declared. 8 in the morning until 5, with Sundays off. Room and board is included. We have a small apartment above the store that's been sitting empty since our daughter married. And so, on a crisp Monday morning, Beckett hitched the wagon to take Josephine into town for her first day of work. She wore one of the dresses he'd purchased, a simple blue cotton that somehow made her eyes appear even more violet, and her chestnut hair was neatly pinned beneath a modest hat. "Nervous?" he asked as they set out. She nodded, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "A little. It's been a while since I've had proper employment. At the boarding house in Denver, I worked for my keep more than wages." "You'll do fine," he assured her. "Numbers come natural to you from what I've seen watching you tally my ranch accounts." She smiled at that. "Your ledger was a mess, Mr. Ryder." "Beckett," he said suddenly. "After all this time, you might as well use my given name." A light blush colored her cheeks. "Beckett," she repeated softly. "Then you must call me Josephine." The wagon rattled into town just before 8. Paradise was coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors and early customers beginning to appear on the boardwalks. More than a few curious glances were directed their way as Beckett helped Josephine down from the wagon in front of the general store. "I'll come by at closing to take you back to the ranch," he said. "Unless you'd prefer to stay in town tonight. The apartment's ready," Mrs. Hollister said. Josephine hesitated. "Perhaps it would be better to stay here tonight." "I shouldn't impose on your hospitality any longer now that I'm working." Though he'd expected this answer, Beckett felt an unexpected twinge of disappointment. "As you wish. I'll help bring your things from the ranch this evening." Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway, beaming at them. "There you are. Come in, come in. Plenty of work to be done." With a small smile and a wave, Josephine followed her new employer into the store. Beckett stood for a moment, watching through the window as Mrs. Hollister showed her the ledgers behind the counter. Then, with a shake of his head, he returned to the wagon and headed to the feed store for his own errands. Throughout the day, as he went about his business, Beckett found his thoughts returning to Josephine. He'd grown accustomed to her presence at the ranch, to the sound of her voice and her quiet movements. The thought of returning to an empty cabin left him feeling oddly hollow. At 5 o'clock, he was waiting outside the general store when Josephine emerged. Her face was tired but glowing with satisfaction. "How was it?" he asked as he helped her into the wagon. "Wonderful," she replied with genuine enthusiasm. "Mrs. Hollister's inventory system is a bit outdated, but the accounts are basically sound. And the customers were so kind, everyone wanted to introduce themselves and welcome me to Paradise. People here are decent," Beckett agreed as he guided the wagon toward his ranch. "Small town, but good folk for the most part." As they traveled, Josephine spoke animatedly about her day, the interesting items in the store, the colorful customers, Mrs. Hollister's detailed instructions about everything from the cash box to the proper way to wrap parcels. Beckett found himself content to listen, enjoying her excitement. Back at the ranch, he helped her gather her few belongings while she changed into one of her other dresses. The cabin suddenly seemed smaller with both of them moving about, aware of each other's presence in a way they hadn't been before. "I've imposed on you long enough," Josephine said softly as she folded the nightgown he'd lent her, one of his own shirts, far too large but clean and soft. "I can't thank you enough for everything." "No imposition," he replied, the words feeling inadequate. "It was nice having company." She looked up at him, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "It was, wasn't it?" The ride back to town was quieter, a certain melancholy settling between them. When they reached the general store, Mr. Hollister was waiting to help carry Josephine's things up to the small apartment above. I'll show her around, Mrs. Hollister assured Beckett. Get her settled proper. He nodded, suddenly at a loss for words. I'll check in tomorrow, make sure everything's all right. Thank you, Josephine said, reaching out impulsively to touch his arm. For everything, Beckett. He tipped his hat, uncomfortable with the emotions tightening his chest. Good night, Josephine. The ride back to his ranch was the loneliest he could remember. The cabin, when he entered, felt cavernous and cold despite the fire he quickly built. He moved about his evening chores mechanically, acutely aware of the silence that had never bothered him before. As he lay in his bed that night, the same bed where Josephine had rested while recovering, Beckett acknowledged the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling for Josephine Mills. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to care deeply for anyone, and never like this. The next few weeks settled into a new pattern. Beckett rode into town every few days, always finding an excuse to stop at the general store. Josephine would greet him with a warm smile that made his heart race, and they'd exchange news about their respective days. Sometimes, when her work was done, she would join him for supper at the small restaurant near the hotel. Their conversations flowed easily, covering everything from books they'd read to their hopes for the future. Beckett found himself opening up to her in ways he never had with anyone else, telling her about his childhood in Missouri, his years as a drifting cowhand, and his dream of building a successful ranch of his own. In turn, Josephine shared stories of her life before Denver, growing up the daughter of a schoolteacher in Illinois, losing her mother to influenza when she was 16, and then her father 2 years later to pneumonia. She spoke of her love of mathematics, how figures made sense to her in a way people sometimes didn't, and her hope of someday having a home of her own again. You're making quite an impression on Paradise, Beckett told her one evening as they walked back to the store after supper. Mrs. Wilson says the church social committee is desperate to recruit you. Josephine laughed, the sound like music to his ears. Mrs. Hollister already warned me. Apparently, once they get their hooks in, you're committed for life. Wise to be cautious, he agreed with a smile. They reached the store, and as had become their custom, Beckett walked her to the side entrance that led up to her apartment. Usually they would exchange goodnights here, but tonight Josephine hesitated. Would you like to come up for coffee? She asked, a hint of nervousness in her voice. It's not very late yet. The invitation surprised him. I wouldn't want to cause any gossip, he said carefully. Mrs. Hollister is still inside, finishing the monthly orders, she assured him, and Mr. Hollister will be back shortly. It's perfectly respectable. With that reassurance, Beckett followed her up the narrow stairs to her apartment. It was small but cozy, consisting of a sitting room with a small stove, a bedroom just visible through a partially open door, and a tiny kitchen area. Josephine had added feminine touches, a crocheted doily on the small table, wildflowers in a jar by the window, a colorful quilt draped over the single armchair. It's not much, she said as she moved to prepare coffee, but it feels like a real home, the first I've had in years. It suits you, Beckett replied, standing somewhat awkwardly in the center of the room. Bright, welcoming. She smiled at that, gesturing for him to sit at the small table while she set the coffee to boil. I've been meaning to thank you properly for everything you've done, she said, her back to him as she worked. The job, the apartment, none of it would have happened if you hadn't found me that day. You've thanked me enough, he said. Besides, you're the one doing the hard work, Mrs. Hollister says the stores never run more efficiently. Josephine turned, leaning against the counter as the coffee brewed. Still, I want you to know how much it means to me, to be safe, to have work I enjoy, to be part of a community again. She paused, a shadow crossing her face. I received a letter yesterday from my cousin in Cheyenne. Beckett felt a sudden knot in his stomach. Good news, I hope? Yes and no. She moved to sit across from him at the table. She's well, which is a relief. But she also warned me that Thomas, the man I was supposed to marry, has been making inquiries about me in Cheyenne. He seems determined to find me. Concern tightened Beckett's features. You think he might come here? I don't know. My cousin didn't tell him anything, of course, but it worries me that he's still looking after all this time. She twisted her hands in her lap. I thought perhaps he would have moved on by now. Some men don't take kindly to being refused, Beckett said grimly. Especially when they're used to getting their way. Josephine nodded, her expression troubled. I've been so happy here I almost forgot about my reasons for running. She looked up at him, vulnerability in her gaze. What should I do, Beckett? I don't want to leave paradise, but I can't bear the thought of bringing trouble here. Without thinking, he reached across the table to take her hand. You're not going anywhere. Paradise looks after its own, and you're one of us now. The conviction in his voice surprised even him. If this Thomas shows his face here, he'll find he's not welcome. The relief in her eyes was palpable. Thank you, she whispered, her fingers curling around his, for believing in me, for making me feel safe. They sat like that, hands joined across the table, until the coffee boiled over, breaking the moment with a hiss of steam. Josephine jumped up to tend to it, her cheeks flushed. As she poured the coffee, Beckett found himself wondering if she could possibly feel the same way about him as he did about her. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. The arrival of Mr. Hollister downstairs, announced by the jingling of the shop bell, brought their evening to a close. As Beckett prepared to leave, Josephine walked him to the door. Will you come to the Founders' Day celebration on Saturday? She asked. The whole town will be there, Mrs. Hollister says. Never been one for celebrations, he admitted, but I might make an appearance. Her smile was worth any discomfort a crowded town event might cause him. I'll look for you then. Saturday dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for Paradise's annual Founders' Day celebration. The town square had been transformed overnight, with bunting hanging from every available surface and tables laden with food contributed by the townspeople. A small stage had been erected for speeches and music, and children ran excitedly between games set up on the grass. Beckett arrived later than most, uncomfortable with the press of people, but drawn by the promise of seeing Josephine. He spotted her immediately, her blue dress standing out among the crowd as she helped Mrs. Hollister arrange pies on one of the dessert tables. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting with a smile that made his heart skip. You came, she exclaimed, wiping her hands on a small apron tied around her waist. I was beginning to wonder. Had to finish my chores, he explained, suddenly aware of how his work clothes compared to the Sunday best everyone else wore. Thought I'd at least stop by. Well, I'm glad you did. She untied her apron. Mrs. Hollister, may I take a break now? Everything's arranged as you wanted. The older woman waved her off with a knowing smile. Go on, enjoy yourself. You've earned it. Josephine led Beckett through the crowd, introducing him to people he knew only by sight despite his years in Paradise. He'd always kept to himself, but with her by his side, he found socializing less burdensome than expected. They sampled food from the various tables, applauded the schoolchildren's recitation of the town's history, and even joined in a group dance when the small band struck up a lively tune. Beckett wasn't much of a dancer, but Josephine's laughter as he awkwardly led her through the steps made his discomfort worthwhile. As afternoon turned to evening, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a warm glow over the festivities. The music turned slower, more romantic, and Beckett found himself standing at the edge of the dancing area, watching as Josephine chatted with a group of young women. She's quite something, isn't she? Doc Wilson's voice came from beside him. Beckett nodded, not taking his eyes off Josephine. She is. Half the young men in town are sweet on her already, the doctor continued, a hint of amusement in his tone, but she doesn't seem to notice any of them. Is that so? Beckett tried to keep his voice neutral. Only seems to have eyes for a certain rancher who found her by the creek. Doc Wilson sipped his punch. Interesting that, before Beckett could respond, a commotion at the edge of the square drew their attention. A stranger was pushing his way through the crowd, his expensive suit and slicked-back hair marking him as an outsider. His flushed face and aggressive movements suggested he'd been drinking. Where is she? The man demanded loudly. I know she's here, Josephine Mills. Beckett's body tensed as he recognized the name. This had to be Thomas, the man Josephine had fled. Across the square, he saw her freeze, the color draining from her face as she turned toward the voice. Without hesitation, Beckett moved toward her, positioning himself between Josephine and the approaching stranger. "Stay behind me," he murmured. "That's her," Thomas shouted, pointing a finger accusingly. "Josephine." "You ungrateful little, that's far enough," Beckett interrupted, his voice calm but steely. "The lady doesn't want to see you." Thomas looked him up and down with contempt. "And who are you, her new protector? Did she tell you she's promised to me?" "That her father arranged our marriage before he died." "That's a lie," Josephine said, stepping forward despite Beckett's attempt to shield her. Her voice shook slightly, but her chin was raised defiantly. "My father would never have given me to a man like you. Your father made up that story to control me." By now, a crowd had gathered around them, the festive atmosphere replaced by tense anticipation. Sheriff Miller pushed his way to the front, his hand resting on his gun belt. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Thomas straightened his jacket. "This woman ran away from Denver, breaking her engagement to me. I've come to take her back where she belongs." "Is that true, Miss Mills?" the sheriff asked, his gaze shifting to Josephine. She shook her head. "I fled because this man and his father were trying to force me into marriage against my will. There was never any proper engagement." The sheriff considered this. "Well, sir, I don't know how things work in Denver, but in Paradise, a woman has the right to choose who she marries. If the lady says she's not engaged to you, then she's not." "This is absurd," Thomas sputtered. "She has no family, no means of support. My father took her in, gave her work and shelter. She owes us." "Miss Mills is a respected member of our community," Mrs. Hollister spoke up from the crowd. "She's employed at my store and is entirely self-supporting. And she has family here now," Beckett added, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "Us, the people of Paradise." Murmurs of agreement rose from the gathered townspeople. Thomas looked around, seemingly surprised by the united front before him. "Sheriff," he tried again, "surely there's some law. Only law being broken here is disturbing the peace at our Founders' Day celebration," Sheriff Miller interrupted. "Now I suggest you head back to the hotel, sleep off whatever you've been drinking, and take the morning stage back to wherever you came from." Thomas's face darkened with anger. "This isn't over," he said, glaring at Josephine. "My father has connections. You'll regret this humiliation." "The lady's made her choice," Beckett said firmly. "I suggest you respect it and move on." For a moment, it seemed Thomas might try something foolish. His hand twitched at his side and Beckett tensed, ready to act. But then the sheriff stepped closer, his hand still on his gun belt, and Thomas seemed to reconsider. "Fine," he spat. "She's not worth the trouble anyway." With that, he turned and pushed his way back through the crowd, which parted to let him pass. As he disappeared down the street toward the hotel, the tension slowly dissipated from the air. Josephine sagged slightly, and Beckett moved to support her elbow. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though she was still pale. "I can't believe he found me. And to come here to make a scene like that." "It's over now," he assured her. "And you heard the sheriff. He has no claim on you here." The band, sensing the need to restore the festive atmosphere, struck up another tune. Slowly, people began to return to their celebrations, though many stopped to offer words of support to Josephine as they passed. "Perhaps I should go home," she said, looking drained by the confrontation. "I don't feel much like celebrating anymore." "I'll walk you," Beckett offered immediately. As they made their way across the square, Doc Wilson stopped them. "Are you all right, my dear? That was quite an unpleasant surprise." "I'm fine, doctor, just a bit shaken," Josephine replied with a weak smile. "I'm taking her home," Beckett explained. "Make sure she rests." The doctor nodded approvingly. "Good, and don't worry about that fellow. Sheriff Miller will make sure he's on tomorrow's stage." With those reassurances, they continued to the general store. Beckett insisted on checking the apartment before leaving Josephine alone, making sure all the windows were secure and showing her how to brace the door with a chair for extra safety. "I don't think he'll try anything tonight," he said, "but better to be cautious." "Thank you," she said softly, standing in the center of her small sitting room. "For standing up for me, for saying I have family here." "Meant it," he replied simply. You do belong here, Josephine. She looked up at him, her violet eyes glistening with unshed tears. With the town or with you? The directness of her question took his breath away. Beckett had never been good with words, had always expressed himself through actions rather than speeches. Now, faced with the most important question he'd ever been asked, he found himself momentarily speechless. Instead of answering with words, he closed the distance between them in 2 strides, took her face gently in his hands and kissed her. It was a tentative kiss at first, giving her every chance to pull away. But instead, Josephine's arms wrapped around his neck, drawing him closer as she returned his kiss with surprising fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Beckett rested his forehead against hers. "With me," he said simply, "if that's what you want." "It is," she whispered. "More than anything." They stood there in the dim light of her apartment, holding each other close as the sounds of the celebration continued in the distance. For the first time since finding her by the creek, Beckett allowed himself to believe in a future with Josephine by his side. "I should go," he said reluctantly, knowing propriety demanded it. "Let you rest." She nodded, though her hands lingered on his shoulders. "Will you come tomorrow, after Thomas has gone?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised, pressing another quick kiss to her lips before forcing himself to step back. As he walked back to where he'd left his horse, Beckett's mind was already racing ahead. He'd need to expand the cabin if Josephine was to live there comfortably. Perhaps add a proper parlor, another bedroom. The thought of building a real home with her filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. True to Sheriff Miller's word, Thomas was escorted onto the morning stage, his threats of legal action falling on deaf ears. Beckett watched from across the street, wanting to be certain the man actually departed. Only when the stagecoach disappeared in a cloud of dust did he relax and head toward the general store. He found Josephine in the store's back room, sorting through a shipment of goods that had arrived that morning. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile so radiant it took his breath away. "He's gone," Beckett confirmed. "Sheriff Miller personally put him on the stage." Relief washed over her features. "Good, though I still worry about what his father might do. He's a powerful man in Denver." "Denver's a long way from paradise," Beckett pointed out, "and you have people here who care about you now." She set down the ledger she was holding and moved closer to him. "One person in particular, I hope." The shyness in her voice, combined with the memory of their kiss the night before, made his heart race. "Definitely one in particular," he agreed, reaching out to take her hand. "Josephine, I'm not much good with fancy words, but I need you to know how I feel. When I found you by that creek, I had no idea you'd come to mean so much to me. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness, I've never met anyone like you." Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "Beckett, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this might seem sudden. Maybe it is, but I've spent most of my life alone, and now that I've found you, I can't imagine going back to that emptiness." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Josephine Mills, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she was smiling. "When you found me by the creek, I was so lost not just physically, but in every way that matters. You gave me safety when I needed it most, but more than that, you gave me a chance to find myself again." She squeezed his hand. "I love you too, Beckett Ryder, more than I thought possible." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as if afraid she might disappear. "Will you marry me, make a life with me on the ranch?" "Yes," she whispered against his chest. "Nothing would make me happier, Mrs." Hollister found them like that minutes later, still embracing in the storeroom. Her knowing smile suggested she'd been expecting this development. "Well, it's about time," she said cheerfully. "The whole town's been taking bets on when you two would realize what was plain as day to the rest of us." Josephine blushed, but she didn't move from Beckett's side. "Mrs. Hollister, I'm afraid I'll have to give notice. Beckett has asked me to marry him." "And you've accepted, obviously," the older woman said with satisfaction. "Well, I can't say I'm surprised, though I'll be sorry to lose you." She patted Josephine's arm. "But love comes first, my dear, always." The news of their engagement spread through paradise faster than wildfire. By supper time, it seemed the entire town had heard, and well-wishers stopped them repeatedly as they walked together to the restaurant. "Didn't realize we were such a topic of interest," Beckett muttered as yet another townsperson offered congratulations. Josephine laughed, slipping her arm through his. "Small town, remember? Besides, you've been the mysterious loner for years. Of course people are excited to see you settling down." The Reverend Jenkins caught them outside the restaurant, beaming at them like a proud father. "Wonderful news, just wonderful," he enthused. "When shall we have the ceremony?" "The church is available any Sunday after services." Beckett looked at Josephine, suddenly realizing they hadn't discussed such details. "We haven't set a date yet, Reverend." "No need to rush," Jenkins assured them. "Though I must say Paradise could use a good wedding. It's been months since the last one." Once they were finally seated in the restaurant, Josephine leaned forward, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "We should probably discuss when we want to be married before the town arranges it for us." Beckett nodded, finding himself surprisingly eager. "How soon is too soon?" "I'm not much for long engagements, nor am I," she admitted, "but I would like a proper wedding dress, and there are things to prepare at the ranch if I'm to live there." 2 weeks, he suggested. "That gives us time to ready the cabin and for you to train someone to take over at the store." Her smile was all the answer he needed. 2 weeks sounds perfect. The following days were a flurry of activity. Beckett threw himself into improving the cabin, adding a larger front porch and beginning work on an additional room that would serve as a proper bedroom. Josephine divided her time between the store, where she was training young Sarah Jenkins to take over her duties, and helping with preparations for the ranch house. Doc Wilson's wife, Martha, took Josephine under her wing, helping her select fabric for a wedding dress and organizing a small group of women to sew it in record time. The entire town seemed invested in their happiness, with offers of help coming from all directions. A week before the wedding, Beckett returned from a trip to Larkspur with a special surprise. He found Josephine at the ranch, arranging wildflowers in jars to brighten the cabin's interior. "Got something for you," he said, trying to contain his excitement as he held out a small velvet box. Went all the way to Larkspur to find it. Josephine's eyes widened as she took the box and opened it. Inside lay a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect amethyst flanked by tiny diamonds. "Beckett," she breathed, "it's beautiful." "Reminded me of your eyes," he explained, suddenly feeling self-conscious. The jeweler said amethysts symbolize peace and contentment. Seemed fitting. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with tears. "It's perfect. I'll treasure it always." She held out the ring in her left hand. "Will you?" Gently, he slid the ring onto her finger, marveling at how right it looked there. "Perfect fit," he murmured. "Like us," she replied softly, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as if paradise itself was celebrating with them. The small church was filled to capacity, with even those townspeople who rarely attended services making an appearance for the occasion. Beckett stood at the altar, uncomfortably aware of his best suit purchased specially for the occasion and still stiff with newness. Doc Wilson stood beside him as best man, offering quiet words of encouragement as they waited. When the small organ began to play and the congregation rose, Beckett felt his heart stop. Josephine appeared at the church doors, a vision in ivory silk. Mrs. Hollister had convinced her to splurge on real silk for the bodice, while the skirt was made of fine cotton. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon, and her chestnut hair was arranged in soft curls beneath a simple veil. She walked down the aisle alone, her head held high. Though she had no family to give her away, there was nothing sad in her solitary procession. Rather, it seemed a testament to her strength and independence, qualities Beckett admired deeply. When she reached him, taking his outstretched hand, he found himself momentarily unable to speak. "You're beautiful," he finally whispered. Her answering smile was radiant. "And you're handsome. I've never seen you in a suit before." "Don't get used to it," he murmured, making her laugh softly. Reverend Jenkins beamed at them before beginning the ceremony. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days, Beckett felt a sense of rightness and completion he'd never known before. This woman who had come into his life so unexpectedly, who had shown such courage and determination, was now his wife. The thought was both humbling and exhilarating. The celebration afterward was held in the town square, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by seemingly every household in paradise. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes until finally, as the sun began to set, Beckett and Josephine took their leave. They rode back to the ranch in the wagon, which had been decorated with ribbons and flowers by the town's children. As they approached the cabin, their home now, Beckett pulled the horses to a halt. "What is it?" Josephine asked, looking at him curiously. Without answering, he climbed down from the wagon and came around to her side. In one smooth motion, he lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest just as he had that fateful day by the creek. "Beckett," she laughed, her arms going around his neck. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he explained, walking toward the cabin. "And remembering the day I found you," her expression softened. "You called me precious that day. I was barely conscious, but I remember the way you said it. You were precious to me even then," he said softly, "though I didn't know it yet." He carried her into the cabin, which had been transformed by their combined efforts over the past 2 weeks. New curtains hung at the windows, the rough wooden furniture had been sanded smooth and polished, and the scent of fresh baked bread left by Mrs. Wilson as a wedding gift filled the air. Setting her gently on her feet, Beckett kept his arms around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder." Josephine's eyes shone with happiness as she looked up at him. "Home," she repeated. "I never thought I'd have one again, not a real one, but this with you, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." "We're just beginning," he promised, lowering his head to kiss her. "The best is yet to come." Life on the ranch quickly settled into a rhythm that suited them both. Josephine proved herself as capable around the ranch as she had been with the store's books, learning to cook on the wood stove, tending a vegetable garden, and even helping with the livestock when needed. Her organizational skills transformed the ranch's operations, and with her guidance, Beckett found himself expanding his herd and improving his profits. 6 months after their wedding, they received a letter that caused brief concern. Thomas's father had indeed made inquiries about Josephine's whereabouts, but the people of Paradise had closed ranks, protecting her location. Eventually, it seemed, he had given up the search, finding another young woman to marry his son. "I almost feel sorry for her," Josephine said as she read the news in a letter from her cousin. "Whoever she is." "Some battles aren't ours to fight," Beckett replied, though he privately shared her concern. "We can only hope she's stronger than they expect." As their first anniversary approached, Josephine began to show signs of pregnancy. Doc Wilson confirmed their suspicions with a broad smile, pronouncing her healthy and the baby likely to arrive in early spring. Beckett threw himself into preparations, completing the additional bedroom he'd started and beginning work on a smaller room that would serve as a nursery. He built a cradle from wood he'd been saving for a special project, carving delicate designs into the headboard and footboard. "It's beautiful," Josephine marveled, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Where did you learn to carve like this?" "My grandfather taught me years ago," he explained. "Always meant to do more of it, but never found the time or the reason." "And now?" she asked, her hand resting on her growing belly. He smiled, covering her hand with his own. "Now I have all the reason in the world." Winter came early that year, bringing heavy snows that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Beckett worried about Josephine's comfort, but she thrived in their cozy home, reading by the fire in the evenings while he worked on small projects for the baby. They talked for hours, planning for the future, dreaming of what their child might be like. "Boy or girl, doesn't matter to me," Beckett said one evening as they sat together on the small sofa he'd acquired from the Wilsons when they purchased new furniture. "Just want a healthy child with your spirit." Josephine leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "And your kindness," she added, "your strength." "Our child will have the best of both of us," he agreed. "And none of my stubbornness, I hope," she laughed at that. "Oh, I don't know, a little stubbornness can be a good thing. It's gotten us both this far, hasn't it?" The baby arrived on a clear spring morning after a night of labor that left Beckett feeling helpless and in awe of his wife's strength. Doc Wilson had been summoned the previous evening and stayed through the night, his calm presence reassuring them both. At dawn, their son was born a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's violet blue eyes. Beckett held him with trembling hands, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features. "He's beautiful," he whispered, sitting carefully beside Josephine on the bed, just like his mother. Josephine smiled tiredly, reaching out to touch their son's cheek. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Now, looking at their child, Beckett knew. "Daniel," he said, "after your father, if that's all right with you." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes. "Daniel James Ryder," she agreed, "after both our fathers." As he held his wife and son, Beckett felt a sense of completeness he'd never imagined possible. From the moment he'd found Josephine abandoned by the creek, their lives had been weaving together, creating a tapestry more beautiful and complex than either could have created alone. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The ranch prospered, allowing them to expand both the house and the herd. 2 years after Daniel's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Martha, named after both their mothers. Paradise grew as well, with the railway bringing new settlers and opportunities. Josephine never returned to working at the general store, but she did help establish Paradise's first proper school, serving on the board and occasionally substituting when the teacher was ill. Her skill with numbers proved valuable to many in town, and she often assisted neighbors with their accounts and business matters. Beckett's reputation as a fair and hard-working rancher grew throughout the territory. He was elected to the town council, though he accepted the position reluctantly, preferring to let Josephine handle the public aspects of their involvement in the community. As their children grew, they filled the ranch with laughter and activity. Daniel showed an early interest in the ranch operations, following his father everywhere and learning the business from the ground up. Elizabeth, to everyone's surprise, inherited her mother's head for figures, but combined it with her father's love of the land, developing innovative ideas for improving cattle breeding and management. On their 10th anniversary, Beckett took Josephine for a ride along Eagle Creek, to the very spot where he had found her all those years ago. The creek looked different in the bright sunshine, peaceful and inviting rather than threatening. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years, he said as they dismounted to sit beside the water. "Feels like yesterday in some ways." Josephine nodded, leaning against him as they watched the water flow. "And yet look at all that's happened. 2 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, a life I never dared dream of. Any regrets?" he asked, his arm around her shoulders. She looked up at him, her violet eyes as bright and clear as the day they'd met. "Not one," she said firmly. "Every step, even the painful ones, led me here to you." "How could I regret that?" He kissed her then, still marveling that this remarkable woman was his wife. "I love you, Josephine Ryder, more today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow. And I love you," she replied softly, "my rescuer, my heart." As they rode back to the ranch, where their children waited with Mrs. Wilson supervising a special anniversary dinner, Beckett reflected on how a single moment had changed everything. If he hadn't decided to take that shortcut by the creek, if he hadn't heard that faint sound, if he hadn't stopped to investigate, his life would be unimaginably different. Emptier. Colder. Instead, he had a family, a purpose, a love that grew stronger with each passing year. All because he had found her abandoned at the creek, lifted her into his arms, and called her precious. Some would call it chance. Beckett called it destiny. Years later, when their grandchildren gathered around asking for stories, that was the one they requested most often. How Grandpa found Grandma by the creek and called her precious. Each time they told it, Beckett and Josephine would exchange a special smile, remembering not just that day but all the days that followed the lifetime they had built together, one day at a time, in their little corner of paradise.